When we think of fighter jets, we picture powerful, fast, and deadly machines that rule the skies and represent the pinnacle of military technology. The image of a fighter tearing through the sky, engines roaring, and performing precise maneuvers is truly impressive. However, the reality is that not all fighter jets manage to achieve that legendary status. Throughout the history of military aviation, many projects began with great expectations, promises of air superiority, and hopes of becoming revolutionary weapons. But in the end, some of these fighters failed to live up to their promises. Despite the engineers' and military's intentions to create unbeatable aircraft, the reality is that several models ended up being disastrous, whether due to design flaws, underperformance, safety issues, or even economic factors. Today, we're going to talk about 5 of the worst fighter jets in history. These are the models that, instead of ruling the skies, ended up becoming true symbols of failure in military aviation. But before we judge them, it's important to understand that each of these jets had a unique story, involving immense pressure, the need for innovation, and the constant pursuit of an edge in combat. So get ready, because we're going to explore together what went wrong with these projects and how these failures helped shape the evolution of the fighter jets we know today. Before we dive in, I ask that you leave a like and share your thoughts about the video. This helps YouTube show this content to more people interested in the topic. Stick with me until the end to learn all the details of this list. First up is the Yakovlev Yak-38, the Soviet answer to the famous British Harrier, but one that unfortunately never quite took off, at least not in the way they had hoped. The Yak-38 was the Soviet Union's attempt to create a vertical takeoff and landing (VTOL) fighter, a revolutionary feature that would allow it to operate on aircraft carriers and in areas with minimal infrastructure. The idea sounded fantastic, a fighter that didn't need long runways and could be used in a variety of scenarios. The problem was, in practice, the Yak-38 had so many limitations that it became more of a burden than an advantage. To start, the Yak-38 had a complex propulsion system with 3 engines, one in the rear and 2 lift turbofans in the front. This made it extremely difficult to maneuver, and if one of the lift engines failed, the pilot almost entirely lost control of the plane. Imagine being in mid-flight and suddenly finding that your jet's stability depends on engines not designed to handle dirt or dust. This was precisely what happened during operations in Afghanistan. The dust caused frequent engine failures, turning the Yak-38 into a real nightmare for its pilots. Beyond handling issues, the Yak-38's tactical performance was poor. It had an operational range of just 200 miles, 320 kilometers, which in practice severely limited its usefulness in real missions. To make things worse, it had only 4 hardpoints, meaning the number of weapons it could carry was ridiculously small for a combat fighter. When compared to the British Harrier, which is still in operation today, the difference in quality and effectiveness is staggering. With the fall of the Soviet Union, the Yak-38 was unceremoniously retired. Looking back, despite the ambition to create a VTOL fighter, the Yak-38 ended up as a classic example of how the rush to compete with Western technology can lead to disastrous results. Next is the Mikoyan-Gurevich MiG-23, a fighter that, despite being designed to be a response to Western fighters of its time, became one of the biggest failures in Soviet military aviation. The MiG-23 was developed to replace the famous MiG-21, which was starting to show its age in combat. The idea was to create a multi-role fighter equipped with variable geometry wings, meaning the wings could change angle mid-flight to provide better performance at different speeds. In theory, this would give the MiG-23 an advantage over its competitors, making it agile in dogfights and fast in straight-line flight. But in practice, this innovation turned out to be a big problem. The main flaw of the MiG-23 was its handling. The aircraft was known to be unstable and difficult to pilot, especially at high speeds. Its engine, though powerful, often overheated and failed at critical moments. This made the MiG-23 a real headache for pilots, who had to deal with a machine that often seemed more interested in fighting them than the enemy. Another major issue was the maintenance cost. The MiG-23 required far more resources and time to stay operational than previous models. And when it finally entered combat, the MiG-23 was a complete disappointment. It participated in conflicts in the Middle East, serving in the air forces of Syria and Iraq, but performed terribly against Western fighters like the F-4 Phantom, F-14 Tomcat, and F-15 Eagle. What was supposed to be an improvement over the MiG-21 ended up being a step backward. Ultimately, the MiG-23 was retired in many countries in favor of the MiG-27, a modified version that fixed some of its problems. However, the damage was done, and the MiG-23 remains in history as one of the biggest failures in military aviation. A clear example of how an advanced fighter can be utterly ineffective if it's not well designed and tested. Moving on to the Convair F-102 Delta Dagger, an American fighter that, despite being developed with high expectations, ended up as another unfulfilled promise in the world of military aviation. The F-102 Delta Dagger was one of the first fighters of the United States Century series and was intended to be the nation's first all-weather supersonic interceptor. With its characteristic delta wing and innovative design for the time, the F-102 seemed destined for success. However, right from the start, problems arose. The biggest challenge was that the F-102 simply couldn't break the sound barrier. In other words, a fighter meant to be supersonic couldn't reach Mach 1. This was a devastating blow to the project. To fix the issue, engineers had to redesign the fuselage completely, incorporating what's known as the area rule, which helps reduce transonic drag. After this overhaul, the F-102 finally reached Mach 1.22, but the damage to its reputation was already done. Beyond speed issues, the F-102 suffered from various other problems. Different models of the aircraft displayed varying capabilities and performance, making training and maintenance a nightmare. The U.S. Air Force couldn't standardize improvements across the fleet, resulting in jets that weren't equally efficient. But what truly buried the F-102's reputation was its safety record. Of the 1,000 F-102s built, 259 were lost in accidents, resulting in the deaths of 70 pilots. For an aircraft meant to protect U.S. airspace, this was an unacceptably high accident rate. Over time, the F-102 was replaced by more advanced models, such as the F-106 Delta Dart, which corrected many of its predecessors' problems. Still, the F-102 Delta Dagger remains a reminder that even the most ambitious projects can come crashing down, both literally and figuratively. Next on our list is the Heinkel He 162, also known as Volksjäger, or People's Fighter, a German jet that represented the desperate effort of Nazi Germany in the final days of World War II. The He 162 was a last-minute project developed when Germany was on the brink of collapse. The idea behind the He 162 was to create a jet fighter that could be produced quickly, with cheap materials, and by semi-skilled labor, including forced laborers. To save time and resources, the jet was designed and built in just 2 months, an impressive speed, but one that resulted in numerous problems. The He 162 was made mainly of wood, as metal alloys were in short supply in wartime Germany. While the idea was practical, the use of wood meant that the aircraft structure was fragile and prone to cracks and damage, especially at high speeds. Additionally, the rushed design led to a series of structural failures, making the plane dangerous and unstable. When finally introduced into combat, it was too late for Germany. The pilots assigned to fly the He 162 were young and inexperienced, with very little training. The jet's deficiencies quickly became evident, and accidents were frequent, with many planes crashing during test flights and training. To make matters worse, the He 162's jet engine, mounted on top of the fuselage, suffered from overheating and rapid wear. In the end, the Heinkel He 162 never had a chance to make a difference in the war. About 300 were built, but most never saw actual combat before the end of World War II. With Germany's defeat, the He 162 became just another footnote in aviation history, symbolizing the haste and desperation of a regime in its last days. The He 162 is a perfect example of how the rush to develop military technology, especially in times of crisis, can result in a jet that is more dangerous to its pilots than to the enemy. The final entry on our list is the Vought F7U Cutlass, a fighter that, despite its futuristic and innovative appearance, ended up being one of the U.S. Navy's most problematic projects. The F-7U Cutlass was developed in the early jet age, a period when engineers were experimenting with new designs and technologies to understand what worked best in combat. Visually, the Cutlass was impressive. It had no conventional tail and had swept-back wings, making it look unlike any other fighter of the time. It seemed like something straight out of a science fiction movie. However, all this innovation brought along a host of issues that made the F-7U one of the most dangerous and unreliable fighters ever built. The first major problem was the engine. The F-7U Cutlass was equipped with engines that were simply underpowered for its size and weight. This meant the aircraft struggled to take off, requiring a much longer runway than most fighters. Pilots quickly nicknamed it the Gutless Cutlass, a reference to the lack of power that made it extremely difficult to operate. Moreover, many of the F-7U's systems were experimental and hadn't been thoroughly tested before being put into operation. This resulted in a series of mechanical failures and accidents, making the Cutlass a dreaded aircraft among Navy pilots. To put things into perspective, the F-7U's accident rate was absurdly high. Out of all the units produced, about a quarter were lost in accidents. This alarming number led many pilots to refuse to fly it, considering it more dangerous than actual combat. The F-7U Cutlass was eventually retired from service in 1959 after only a few years of operation. It never saw real combat and, in practice, served only as a lesson on the dangers of pushing technological experimentation too fast without ensuring the aircraft's reliability and safety. The project was abandoned, and the Navy moved on, learning from the mistakes made. The Vought F7U Cutlass serves as a reminder that no matter how innovative and impressive a fighter jet might look, it needs to be reliable and effective, especially when pilots' lives are at stake. These models, the Yakovlev Yak-38, the Mikoyan-Gurevich MiG-23, the Convair F-102 Delta Dagger, the Heinkel He 162, and the Vought F7U Cutlass serve as clear examples of how developing combat aircraft can be treacherous and filled with challenges. Each of these jets teaches us valuable lessons. The Yak-38 showed how rushing to compete with foreign technologies can lead to a flawed project. The MiG-23 reminded us that technological innovation doesn't always result in an effective product. The F-102 Delta Dagger highlighted the importance of testing and standardizing improvements before putting an aircraft into service. The He 162 revealed the danger of developing weapons in desperate situations, where a lack of time and resources can compromise quality. And the F-7U Cutlass, finally, showed us that excessive experimentation without ensuring reliability can be a direct path to failure. In the end, military aviation is an area where the margins for error are minimal, and the costs of failure are incredibly high, both in terms of resources and human lives. While these jets failed in their original purpose, they left an important legacy. Every mistake made in these projects served as a lesson for future engineers and strategists, helping to shape the fighters we see in action today, which are far safer, more effective, and more lethal. These failures, though painful, were necessary steps in the evolution of military aviation. After all, it's through mistakes that we learn and build a more solid path forward. And that's why, even when looking at the worst fighter jets in history, we can find valuable lessons about perseverance, innovation, and the constant pursuit of improvement. If you enjoyed this video, you'll also like this one I'm suggesting that's appearing on your screen. Share your thoughts in the video comments. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do, and thank you for watching.